Obviously, the first reason I got in touch with you is because you've been organising the poetry and word stage at Glastonbury, and I wondered how long you've been organising that, and what's the biggest challenge that you faced so far.
Yeah, I've been organising it since 2008. So a woman called Pat VT West set it up many years ago now, and unfortunately she passed away that year, and she handed it over to me just before she died. So I've been doing it ever since then, and it's just kind of gone from strength to strength ever since. So we started off with a much smaller tent than we're in now for a few hours a day, and now we do solidly through from 12 till 7 every day. Biggest challenges is just organising all of it, really. It's a lot to organise, 7 hours a day worth of performance, and I think 32 poets we had this year, so it's a lot of different poets to bring together and coordinate.
And so obviously you mentioned you're carrying on that legacy as well. I mean, are you do you think that it's sort of growing with you as well?
Yeah, it's quite a different thing to when Pat ran it.
Yeah.
It used to be in a corner of the Greenfields. And really, when she ran it, she was given a corner of the Greenfield, and she did everything. So she transformed that little corner into a tent, backstage area, everything.
Yeah.
When she asked me to take it over, I said, really, I can't do what you do. I don't have the time or the resources. But if there's a tent there, and that was when it moved to theatre and circus, and it's certainly been growing every year in terms of programming and space and all the rest of it.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's a great little area as well, actually, because it kind of brings the different arts together, I suppose, as well. I mean, do you ever get to work on sort of crossovers with, we say the cabaret tent or anything like that?
Sometimes we share artists. So we have Attila the Stockbroker every year, for instance. We've had John Hegley for the last few years, and he's done a stint in cabaret in the past. Porky the Poet, who's also known as Phil Dupitus, he's performed in both cabaret and poetry and words. So we do get performers who perform elsewhere on site and elsewhere in theatre and circus as well. But it sort of runs on its own.
Fair enough, yeah. And I know you work on some other festivals as well. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, really just Llama Tree Festival. Just got back from there, actually. Got back yesterday, where I do the poetry line-up there. It's just a couple of hours in the evenings at an area called the Lost Woods. So Llama Tree Festival is a complete opposite end of the scale to Glastonbury, really. It's a lovely little festival in Dorset. It's at a botanical gardens. And the Lost Woods stage is literally in a wood, so little copse that you go through. You sort of wind through this wood and you get to this little clearing, and then that's where the poetry stage is. And I program that on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday night.
Ah, brilliant. And so obviously I suppose you've seen a lot of different artists as well over the years, and I was wondering, who's the best performer in terms of a spoken word performer that you've ever seen, and who did you think was best at Glastonbury 2014 as well?
I can't answer that. They're all brilliant. They're all fantastic.
It's a very diplomatic answer.
Well, it's just impossible. There's so much variety anyway.
Yeah.
You can't compare, cheese with turnips or whatever it is. We've got poets who are funny. We've got poets who use music in their acts. We've got poets who are very serious and political. We've got some who are more sort of punk poetry. Yeah. Some who are more what you might identify as a kind of slam poetry or spoken word kind of genre. We've got people who work in groups. So we had the Fugitives, who are a poetry band this year. You just can't sort of put them all in a pot and rank them. It's just not possible. But we get hundreds and hundreds of applications every year to perform on the stage. So everyone who performs on that stage at Glastonbury is top of their game and a really excellent poet.
Well, one thing I was going to ask actually is if there's anything in particular you look for in an artist, but I suppose you kind of answer that in a way that I suppose there's no one thing, but you sort of talent when you see it, I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's not only me that makes the decisions is one thing. I have a committee who look at them, because I think it's quite important that it's not just one person's decision about what goes on that stage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we have a poetry and words committee, and we all look at I put together a short list, and the committee all look at the applications. It's very important that they are a performer.
Yeah.
So, you can be a brilliant writer, but you really, particularly for somewhere like a festival, you need to be able to perform your work. You need to come across as an engaging performer and not just being very good on the page. So we've had applications from people who are, excellent authors who want to do things like read a chapter of their book, or give a talk or read from a piece of paper effectively. And there are ways of reading from a piece of paper and performing, but often that doesn't engage people. And you need to do that at Glastonbury. You have to really fight for people's attention. So they need to be a good performer as well as a good writer.
Yeah, definitely, I can see that. Yeah.
And then, there's so much variety, it's all about the balance as well. It's about trying to get that balance on the bill so that you've got all that variety and all those different voices there.
Yeah, makes sense. And I suppose it's early days yet, but is there anything you can tell us about your plans for 2015? Not necessarily artists, but kind of, there's going to be an overarching theme or anything exciting that we can look forward to?
Well, I tend to have a bit of a sort of quiet period after the festival because otherwise I could just be doing it all the time. So I open the applications in January, we put that out, and then people can apply to perform on the stage. And I sort of tend to do the feedback for this festival and reflecting on what to do for next year around about this kind of time. But I don't really, I tend to not do anything much around it between sort of July and December time because I just have to have some off time before I start up again. So there's not really much to tell about 2015 just yet.
Well, we can. I'll include all links to your Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and that sort of thing as well, so people can check out as well as and when they read this.
Well, one thing we will be doing very soon is we had a video artist, Matt Gillett, this year videoing all the performances.
Okay.
So we'll be putting those up on our YouTube channel soon. They're starting to trickle into my inbox now, and they'll be going up any day, really. So that's something to look out for.
That's brilliant. I actually subscribed to your YouTube channel. I subscribed last year after there was a Kate Tempest video that you posted that I subscribed for, and so I'll look forward to that.
Well, they will be going up very soon. I'm actually off to another festival tomorrow. When I get back, they'll start to go up.
Brilliant. And actually, kind of a few things I wanted to ask you about as well is obviously your own writing as well, and I know you've performed at a lot of festivals as well. I guess I'm wondering sort of how do you find the balance between sort of promoting other writers and working on your own sort of career as well?
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually, because it's a lot of the time people just put you in one box or another. So you would think that running a poetry stage at Glastonbury, people would think, oh, yes, this is a poet that we want to kind of look out for. But instead they think, oh, you're a promoter. So people tend to sort of seem to want to put you in one box or another. Either you're a poet or you're a promoter. So getting that balance can be quite tricky. I think that's a really good question. I mean, Lavatory Festival, because it's basically a lot less work for me. I compare there and I always do a set there. So that's quite nice in terms of juggling that. So when I compare, I end up sort of smashing a few poems into my comparing, and so they work quite well together. Glastonbury, I always do a set as well, but it's usually a very, very tiny set, so I did about 10 minutes this year. And it's very strange trying to get into that frame of mind and going from running the stage to suddenly being on stage. It's quite a shift that's involved in doing that. Everything I do, a lot of what I do anyway, is about poetry or the arts in one form or another. So my main job is actually as a lecturer. I'm a psychology lecturer, and I lecture in, amongst other things, psychology of creativity and the arts. And so I guess I deal with poetry in lots and lots of different forms, lots of different hats on.
It's interesting you mention that, actually, because I picked up that you've been conducting a research project exploring the neuropsychology of metaphor creation, and I wondered what exactly does that sort of study involve?
Well, that's been working with a group of researchers at the Crackle Centre at the University of Gloucestershire, and in their EEG lab. So I don't know if you've seen the pictures of it. It looks a bit sort of like something out of Hellraiser when you get all the little the suction caps on your skull, and they measure the electrical energy effectively. As you can probably tell from that description, that's more their kind of specialism.
Yeah.
So my role in it has been more as a qualitative researcher. So a couple of researchers, Graham, Edgar, Di Catherwood, who work in the lab and specialise in neuropsychology and know a lot more about EEG, deal with that side of things. And then I interviewed people after the study. So what we got people to do was we got them to create pairings. Essentially, a metaphor is sort of how is one thing like another thing.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we showed the participants a pairing of an image and a word, and then asked them to think of something that linked them.
Yeah.
And we did that with several different pairings, and we did that with both creative writers, so people who sort of express their creativity in writing and poetry and so on, and visual artists.
Okay.
And what we were interested in was whether a lot of different things really, but partly whether different processes were happening amongst people who worked visually and amongst people who worked with words. And then my role was to come along and interview people afterwards and ask them much more about that creative process to try and make sense of the EEG data. So EEG data gives you lots and lots of different numbers, and it's a massive data to search around in and really find out where to look and where the meaning is. So the interviews have enabled us to kind of be a bit more focused in where we're looking and what time period we're looking and what kind of things we might be looking for.
So have you sort of had any results with that so far, or is that still kind of ongoing?
It's ongoing, really. We're still sort of putting it through at the moment. There's lots of different researchers involved in it, so coordinating us all with all of our various other commitments has meant it's been a relatively slow-going research project. But certainly started to look at the interview data and analyse that and find some really interesting things about the creative process. And I'm hoping to go back to that at some point and do a set of analysis into it, which is just about the creative process more generally, rather than specifically, what's going on in the brain when we create metaphors.
Yeah. Cool. And so sort of like ending on an easy one, I suppose. We ask everybody what the last book they read was and what they thought of it.
Oh, I've just finished the Dark Tower series by Stephen King.
I was reading about that earlier. Actually, I haven't read any of those. Are they good?
They are. The first one, I didn't think was very good.
Yeah.
So I would say that if anyone's sort of planning on reading the series, labour through the first one because it's worth it. And there's actually 7 of them, so there's quite a lot of them. And it's kind of a cross between sort of sci-fi, fantasy, and spaghetti western.
Yeah.
It is very interesting. It's very good, and it's one of those things because I was reading it for so long because there's 7 books and they're reasonably long that I felt sort of quite bereft when I finished it.
I was going to say it's interesting because I started reading today The Green Mile, but at the beginning of that there were some when sort of books start with letters from the author just to sort of to update the reader, and he was talking about the way he wrote it in serialized form, but he was supposed to be finishing off the series you've just finished when he wrote The Green Mile. So it's kind of around about the same time. But it's strange that because I don't really read lots of Stephen King, but every now and then I sort of have to dip back in for a fix.
Well, this is the first time I'd ever read Stephen King, actually.
Yeah. Some of them
and I just associated him with horror.
Yeah.
I'm not a big horror fan. And there certainly are bits in the Dark Tower series that are a little bit gruesome.
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot that isn't. They're sort of peppered throughout the series, and there's a lot more which is, it's a ripping yarn, really.
Yeah. I suppose it's almost like Asimov as well, because he was known as a sci-fi writer, but he did sort of all different kinds of work on top of that as well. And I suppose King's a bit like that, but not as broad.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely worth reading the Dark Tower series. There are things about it that I didn't like, and one thing that I found really notable about it was that it seems to be something he wrote throughout his life.
Yeah. And
so he wrote the first book when he was 19, and you can really tell the difference between the sort of maturity of the writing as you go through the book.
Yeah.
There's a book that he wrote very, very late, which actually inserts between books 4 and 5, I think. So it's sort of book 4B, but he wrote it last. And that's the first book I read. And if I hadn't have read that one, I wouldn't have read the series.
Yeah.
So I do think that, I would sort of labour through The Gunslinger, which is the first one. And then after that, it's a very interesting set of books.
Sailing.